The trade standoff between two neighboring countries, the US and Canada, has now extended beyond typical political issues. Canada's retaliatory actions against the US tariffs are not only immediately affecting the US farming sector, but they could also mark the beginning of a broader crisis in global agriculture. The situation began escalating when the US imposed a 25% tariff on various Canadian goods, including agriculture products such as grains, meat, and dairy. Canada didn't hold back in its response. It immediately retaliated by slapping tariffs on US goods like corn, soybeans, and beef. This has not only increased export costs for US farmers, but also forced them to face immense difficulties in finding alternative markets. Dairy industry. US. Dairy farmers, who have long relied on Canada as a crucial trading partner, are now suffering significant losses. The new tariffs have made dairy exports to Canada prohibitively expensive, reducing demand and driving prices down. Many dairy farms in the US are facing severe financial crisis. Grains and soybeans for corn and soybean farmers. Canada has been one of the largest export markets. However, retaliatory tariffs have caused prices to plummet, and farmers are now stuck with unsold crops. This situation has led to massive financial losses for these farmers. Livestock industry, cattle, and pig farmers are also feeling the sting. The cost of exporting meat to Canada has skyrocketed, driving down demand, with prices in free fall and export costs rising. Many livestock producers are scrambling to find new markets. This crisis is not just about immediate losses for farmers. It's going to have far-reaching consequences for the economy at the local, national, and even global levels. Global agricultural market. The standoff between the US and Canada could create a significant gap in the global agricultural market, which countries like China, Mexico, and the EU may seize to increase exports. Where the US and Canada are losing ground, technological innovation and strategic shifts. In the face of market uncertainty, many farmers are turning to precision agriculture to improve efficiency. However, these technologies require significant investment, and the financial pressure from tariffs is making it more difficult for farmers to invest, reshaping the agricultural landscape in the long run. This trade dispute could push for a restructuring of agricultural practices in both the US and Canada. Many small family-owned farms may be forced to sell to larger corporate farms, accelerating farm consolidation. Emotional and social toll. Beyond financial hardships, farmers are facing significant emotional distress. With the mounting financial pressures, the mental health of farmers is becoming an increasingly critical issue. This trade war between the US and Canada may be a major setback for the US farming industry, but it could also represent a turning point in global agricultural trade. While the immediate impacts are severe, there are also potential opportunities for farmers and countries to adapt to new markets and find innovative solutions. The future of agriculture will depend on how these sectors respond to the rapidly changing trade landscape. Europe is shifting its energy strategy. Its dependence on Russia and the US has led these countries to face major risks in energy supply, especially with rising geopolitical tensions. But now Europe is looking for new sources, and surprisingly, Canada, a neighbor to the US, is emerging as a promising choice. So, why is Canada rising as such a strong contender? Europe seeks new energy sources. Canada is the optimal choice for many years. Europe has relied on natural gas from Russia to meet its massive energy demands. However, political crises such as the Crimea event and the Ukraine conflict have highlighted the risks inherent in this dependence. Moreover, while the US is an important supplier, the cost of LNG from the US is simply too high, and long-term contracts are not very flexible. Europe needs an alternative, a more stable energy source, and it's not hard to see that Canada, with its abundant resources and strategic location, could meet this need. So why has Canada become such an attractive choice? First, Canada has an abundant supply of natural gas capable of providing long-term energy to Europe without fear of shortage. Second, Canada's strategic location helps reduce the cost of transporting LNG to European ports much quicker and more cost-efficient than shipping from the US. Not only that, with its clean natural gas projects, Canada can provide cleaner LNG, which is crucial for European countries pushing forward with their transition to renewable energy and reducing emissions. Canada threatens the US LNG Empire. The LNG trade war is escalating when discussing Canada's competitive advantage. One key factor stands out: the much lower transportation costs for LNG compared to the US from ports on Canada's East Coast. Natural gas can be shipped quickly and cost-effectively to Europe. While the US is a major LNG producer, transportation costs from the Gulf Coast ports are higher, combined with complex long-term contract regulations, making it difficult for the US to compete effectively in the long run. Canada, on the other hand, has the ability to offer more flexible contracts, allowing European countries to adjust supply based on demand, rather than being locked into rigid multi-year agreements. To better understand Canada's growing role in the LNG industry, we can't ignore the major LNG projects currently underway. One standout project is LNG Canada in Quemont, British Columbia, with key players like Shell, Total Energies, and Petronas involved. When it comes online in 2025, this project will have the capacity to provide up to 2 billion cubic feet of gas per day, an impressive figure that has the potential to change the global energy landscape. Additionally, Canada has other LNG projects in development in regions like Nova Scotia and Quebec, promising significant increases in the country's LNG export capacity. With Canada's rapid growth in the LNG sector, the US is now under major pressure. US LNG suppliers must rethink their strategies to maintain their market share in Europe. If not, they could lose billions of dollars in LNG export revenue. In fact, the US is already discussing the possibility of policy support, like tax cuts or incentives for LNG exporters. But can the US maintain its position? While Canada is rapidly growing and attracting attention from global nations, it's not just the US and Canada. Even countries like Russia and the Middle East are adjusting their strategies to maintain their influence. Canada is rising, drawing interest from Europe as well as major markets like Japan, South Korea, and India. So can Canada truly rise to become a global LNG superpower? And can the US adjust its strategy to face competition from Canada? Have you ever thought that an energy war could completely change a country's economy? Don't think that only war or politics can affect the economy. In this video, we'll explore an unprecedented showdown between the US and Canada, and how this could send gas prices skyrocketing, potentially driving the US economy into an energy crisis that few could ever imagine. US and Canada, an unprecedented energy war. In early 2025, the US decided to impose a 25% tariff on goods imported from Canada. The US government justified this by citing concerns over illegal immigration and drug trafficking. However, these moves are far from simple. Canada is not sitting idly by and has immediately prepared countermeasures. One of the strongest actions they could take is to reduce energy exports, particularly crude oil, a crucial commodity for the US economy. This could deal a heavy blow to the US energy sector, but Canada isn't stopping at cutting oil exports. They've also issued a serious threat. They could stop importing alcohol from the US, a key export from the US to Canada. If these measures are implemented, some US states like Michigan and New York, who rely heavily on oil imports from Canada, could face severe energy shortages. As a result, gas prices will skyrocket, and energy-dependent businesses will suffer massive losses. Cutting off energy supplies from Canada won't just drive up gas prices, it will also cause a disruption in the US energy supply chain. Areas like the Midwest and the Mountain region will be particularly affected as their energy needs heavily depend on Canadian crude oil. This move could force the US economy to face higher energy costs and struggle with production challenges. Energy-intensive industries will have to contend with rising costs, impacting workers, wages, and business profits. China cuts US oil imports is a global crisis, looming not only Canada, but China. China, one of the largest buyers of US crude oil, is also making big moves to sharply reduce its oil imports from the US. But why is this happening? China is no longer as dependent on US crude as it once was. The reason China is seeking cheaper oil from Russia, Iran, and Venezuela countries that the US has sanctioned China is capitalizing on this shift to access cheaper oil, making it a stronger competitor for the US. In just 1 year, China's oil import from the US have plummeted, costing the US a huge oil market. This impacts US oil export revenue and also weakens America's position in the global oil market. China is forging a powerful energy alliance with BRICS countries like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, which helps China cut its energy costs while strengthening China's role as a global energy powerhouse. China is using a comprehensive strategy to secure cheap and stable energy by increasing cooperation with countries like Russia and Iran. China can bypass sanctions and lower its costs, further diminishing the US's influence in the global oil market. Even though these countries are politically isolated, they're still ready to provide cheap oil to China, creating a new force in the global energy market. So will an energy crisis hit the US? If these trends continue, the US will lose oil exports, and domestic energy prices will skyrocket, putting serious pressure on the economy. Especially since the US is so dependent on oil, US producers will face lower profits, and there may even be a drop in jobs within the energy sector. The US will need stronger strategies. Canada has just done something most of us didn't expect, turning its back on the US and shifting its crude oil exports to China. So why is Canada doing this? What does this mean for the US economy and the global economy? Canada bypasses the US shifts oil exports to China. Why is China? You're probably used to Canada supplying oil to the US for many years, but now Canada is making a bold move, bypassing the US and sending crude oil directly to China. This isn't just an economic decision, it's a global political strategy. What's crucial here is the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline with a massive investment of over $24 billion. The goal is to triple the pipeline's capacity from 300,000 barrels per day to 890,000 barrels per day. This allows Canada to ship crude directly to Asian markets, especially China, without going through the US, a bold move. Indeed, China is now Canada's biggest potential market. As China's energy demand continues to grow, this is an opportunity for Canada not only to sell oil, but to build a long-term strategic partnership. China is heavily investing in oil, refining infrastructure and port facilities to accommodate Canadian crude. This is not just a trade deal, it's a partnership between two major economies. How is the global balance of power changing? How is the US responding? Canada's move isn't just changing the energy market. It's shifting the global balance of power by choosing China as a strategic partner. Canada could trigger a shockwave in international relations, leaving the US on the defensive. This doesn't just affect Canada and the US, but also impacts other nations, like Europe and the Middle East. Oil-producing countries will need to adjust their export strategies. They can no longer maintain one-sided relationships and rely solely on the US, but will need to diversify their trade partnerships and renegotiate oil contracts in more favorable directions. With Canada shifting its oil exports to China, the US will lose its cheap and stable oil supply from Canada. Previously, Canadian crude made up around 60% of total US oil. Imports losing this supply. The US will face higher domestic production costs and potentially disruptions in its energy supply chain. The US oil industry and policymakers will need to make major adjustments. Refineries will have to pay higher prices for oil, leading to increased production costs. While energy companies' profits are impacted, the US government will also need to find new partners or ramp up domestic oil production to minimize the impact. America must quickly reassess Its energy strategies, politicians, and oil producers must push for more flexible policies, expanding energy sources from alternative partners. Otherwise, the US will struggle to maintain its position as a global energy superpower. Canada is seizing this opportunity to rise not just as an oil supplier, but as a strategic partner in a rapidly changing world. This could mark a turning point in global energy politics completely, shifting the balance of power between nations. So what do you think about Canada's bold move? Could it pave the way for a new future for the energy market and international relations? In recent months, the relationship between the US and Canada has become more tense, especially after President Donald Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada. This decision not only affects Canada's industries, but also undermines the long-standing trade relationship between the two neighboring countries. This tariff has sparked concerns about the competitiveness of Canadian businesses in the global market and has escalated trade tensions. But this is just the beginning. Trump has made provocative statements about Canada's sovereignty, even threatening to annex Canada into the US. These comments have deeply insulted Canadians and made them feel threatened about their independence and national sovereignty. Amid these threats and pressure from Trump, the Canadian people chose not to accept these attacks on their sovereignty and values. They responded by launching a powerful grassroots boycott campaign, not just against American goods, but also against US tourism. Canadian businesses and consumers began cutting back on spending on American products, choosing to support Canadian-made goods instead. From major supermarkets and shopping centers to small local stores, Canadians made a collective decision to avoid American goods. Not only did they stop buying American products, but they also canceled planned trips to the US. This campaign is not just a reaction to Trump's policies. It's a clear stand against disrespect and a way for Canadians to protect their national values. This movement has spread quickly, sending a powerful message that Canada will not be intimidated. The power of the people is undeniable, and this boycott has become a symbol of resistance. Canada's boycott campaign has had significant economic repercussions for the US states that heavily rely on Canadian tourists, such as Florida, Texas, and New York, are experiencing substantial losses in tourism revenue. Canadians, who have long been some of the largest foreign visitors to the US, have started to reduce or completely stop traveling. To the US, estimates show that even a 10% decrease in Canadian tourists could result in the loss of 140,000 jobs and a $2 billion hit to the US tourism industry. It's not just tourism. American brands from Kentucky, bourbon to consumer goods are also feeling the impact. Canadians are choosing to purchase Canadian-made products instead, signaling their growing discontent. With Trump's policies, this boycott is having tangible effects on the US economy, especially in sectors dependent on Canadian consumers. This is more than just a trade war. Canada's boycott has become a symbol of unity and a stand for national sovereignty. Every time Trump makes provocative comments, Canadians become more determined to protect their values. The strength of this grassroots boycott is clear. It's not only about avoiding American goods, but it's also about resisting a government that disrespects Canada's sovereignty. The solidarity seen in Canada today is sending a clear message to the world. Canada will never bow down to threats from a country like the US. From empty supermarkets to deserted tourist attractions, Canadians have shown that the power of collective resistance can shift the course of this trade conflict. This is a lesson on protecting national interests, no matter the pressure from a larger neighbor like the US. The trade war between the US and Canada goes beyond tariffs and shocking statements. It's a fight for sovereignty, respect, and the unity of the people. Every consumer choice and every canceled trip is a bold statement from Canada that they will never yield to threats and disrespect from the President of the United States. This is a turning point, and Canada is ready to defend its future.